Okay, so welcome to the eighth episode of the Monitor Deep Banking podcast. Today we have a partner of ours on the podcast, so welcome very much Subrato Bhattacharya, the head of product management and strategy of TCS Banks. Maybe to start with and to relax us a bit, maybe you want to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for having me on this podcast of yours. My name is Subrato. I work with TCS Banks from the banking suite of solutions. I tend to lead the product strategy and product management functions and have been in this intersection of technology and finance. Been working on this segment since close to around 20 plus years, or 28 plus years to be specific now. And yep, I work with customers who are quite mature in terms of their processes, to even startups who are kind of challenging the game. Yep. Thanks. And I like the topic for that matter that you run on this series. So thought let's meet up and talk about it.
Okay, great. So I understand you are based in Calcutta, but I'm sure in your role you're in charge of global clients. Now, TCS
Yes.
Banks has many solutions to offer, so you have a kind of an end-to-end provider. So when you're looking at your clients, so what are the big transformational topics your clients are busy with nowadays?
These times are pretty busy, right? I mean, as I say, banking itself is at a pivotal moment, right? It's at a point of inflection, right? Multiple reasons. I'll come to that in a bit. But essentially, if you look at it, there is a shift from product centric banks, I mean, who used to sell the products onto the customers, to more, I would say, experience led models, right? When I say experience led, it is basically customer need and driven kind of, approach is coming in, right? So that is from a banking, I see more customer driven experiences which are driving this whole industry now from that perspective, right? That is one from the product and the customer standpoint. Second happens to be, these challenger banks or the digital native banks, right? They are setting a new benchmark, right? Benchmark of engagement, I would say, right? Engaging with the customers, building very niche solutions, offerings for their customers, etc. Right? And what I see, the mature or the large banks or the legacy banks, if I may want to say, for want of better word, uh, they are in that catch-up game, right? So they are catching up with the digitally native ones, while many have actually in various pockets or markets have done pretty well in living up to the expectations or the requirements or the experience requirements of the customers. So now, if you take these two into account and see all put together, in terms of focus, if you look at, the focus is now more on relevance, right? Relevance to the end user or the end client, right? That is point one. Point two happens to be trust, right? You need to get that trust with that customer. Why should he be your primary bank account for that matter? And third is pretty important, which I have been personally, advocating as well. How can banks embed themselves into the customers' lives, right? See, a old saying was, banking is necessary, but banks are not, right? So technically, if you look at it or take it in that way, that banking has to be embedded with the customer journey, right? His life journey. And banks have to be omnipresent as well as invisible, right? In that way. So that's the transition that I'm
Hmm.
seeing. And obviously the technology parts you pretty well know. We can elaborate later as well. But primarily on a high level, these are the things that I am seeing. The current state of affairs or
Yeah.
state of the union.
You know, both of us have been in this industry for a long time. Myself,
Yeah.
37 years now, and I don't think the banks have started this journey yesterday. You know, when I remember 20 years ago, they called it, we need to go away from product silos to customer centric. Now you called it experience led. Is this just
Yeah.
a new name on the same can, or has really something changed? You know, or did they just rebrand it not to show that they have been unsuccessful for 20 years? So how do you see that?
I would rather put it in a different way. I mean, customer centric is one. When I say experience, it is typically you are actually embedding yourself in that journey moment or finding out that moment of truth, okay, and delivering that experience there, right? Uh, the product may be there, it may be a customer centric product, but you as a bank need to identify that small moments of truth in that customer journey and should be available at that moment of time, right? Um, that's what I call as an experience-led,
Okay, okay.
model.
Which kind of most likely brings us to data, you know, because you need to
Yes,
identify this point, this moment of truth, and
correct.
so how ready do you think your clients are with data?
Okay, with respect to data, still they're on silos. Okay, not all, I would say, but on a broad yardstick, if I want to, put it across, banks are taking steps towards breaking these silos, taking those steps in. One is basically they have been built inorganically. People who are starting up new have new technologies in place. They understand much more in terms of it's not only, let's say, for example, the banking data, which is actually making sense for that moment. You need to identify there are multiple sets of data like structured, unstructured, and various sources of data which need to be brought in together to then derive that moment of truth, right? That's where I see banks should invest or investing now. While AI is there, but essentially the foundational layers of the data has to be a prime importance, and we see banks working towards those.
Okay. Do you think in your view this drive to experience led banking, let's call it that way, which is very similar to what we call deep banking, is this more driven
Yep.
by the consumers? Is it driven by competitors offering this to consumers, or how do you see that?
Uh, I would rather say that see the most of these new generation consumers, right? So if you look at the demographics across the market, the Gen Zs are coming into the banking space or the banking fold for that matter, right? They have been very digitally native, right? Since an early stage of life, right? They have seen consumer apps, the way it behaves, the way it works. Uh, they have started demanding it from the bank as well, right? From their banks. So now, if you need to look at that experience-led banking or the deep banking that you run. That experience-led banking has to look at because it is most I say consumer driven because he has already experienced real-time elements in his consumer apps. He's now expecting such behavior or a response from his bank as well, right? Which understands him, responds to his needs, brings in the right elements at the right moments of time. So those all things are typically, I would say, is more consumer-led. I would say.
Okay, okay. I assume from a bank's perspective, there are maybe a few challenges that they need to overcome. You know, we mentioned data
Yep.
before, maybe it's still very siloed. Maybe it's
Yep.
sometimes mindset. I think, how do you see regulation play into that? Because you know, if I'm offering a Netflix experience, I'm in a completely unregulated field. I can essentially do whatever I think is good for the consumer, but that's in my experience not always the case on the banking side. So do you think is the regulator supporting? Do your clients work with the regulator, or do you think there is a gap between what consumers want and what regulators want? How do you see that?
I see that as a gap. Okay. And I see that as a gap in multiple ways, right? Not only regulators, right? While even within the bank, right, there is a, you know, ambition, vision, and the execution. That gap is there. Right? The technology stacks that they run is the first thing, right? Mostly they need to be modernized from that perspective. Regulators asking for, elements which primarily, let's say, for example, consent, right, is a very prime example of how regulation is driving this, right? So it's a kind of a trade-off which needs to be dealt with, right? You are very right in that sense, right? I can design an experience, but at the end of the day, it has to meet the regulatory needs as well. I see our banks, our customers are trying to figure out ways of working with the regulator, as well as now with the advent of technology and other, the supporting infrastructure, probably we should have some answer with respect to, let's say, encryption or any other elements putting in. Uh, those should be able to address the concerns around, let's say, if I take consent as a piece in isolation, right? In sharing data, right? So even the consumers to that extent have to get educated, right? In terms of data sharing. Why is that data needed? If they need an experience, they have to share that data.
You are active in multiple different regions. You know, where do you
Yep.
see your clients to be most progressed? You know, I guess also consumers are different because I'm originally from Switzerland, living in Asia for 18 years. In Europe, they're all about data privacy. In Asia, people don't care
Yeah.
so much about data privacy. They want to have better experiences, which
Correct.
then also drives, of course, what the bank offers. So if you would need to put them into a rating, so where do you see the most progressed region on the journey to banking or to experience-led banking?
Uh, there are two, I would rather say, hotspots in my view, right? Europe is still not yet, in that mix, I would say. Okay. I would put Asia Pacific, as you rightly said, as well as on the to Middle East to an extent, right? As to be the hotspots, which when I say hotspot, in the sense that yes, consumers are willing to take that the experience-led banking or deep banking kind of a construct out there. It all depends on See, it all depends on the way they have experienced, or their bank provides those safeguards and the trust they have on the banking industry in large in those regions. That is actually driving, I would say, the sensitivity of or the risk associated, or his work of, or his assessment of the risk, his or her assessment of the risk is dependent on the geography in terms of the demographics out there, in terms of the culture and the ethics out there. So, if you look at it in totality, it's uh, typically ethical banking is a play which has its role in typical these markets, right? So I would rather say, if along with experience led banking, if banks can get into this ethical banking paradigm, that would also help them, you know, deliver those kind of experience led banking in a sense.
You were introducing a new term, ethical banking. What do you mean by that? In my experience, banking is, let's say, not the most ethical industry on the planet. So what do you mean by saying ethical banking?
Okay, ethical banking, I would rather say, let's say, for example, you've heard of Islamic or Sharia compliant banking, right? Uh, where things are documented, or rather, not only that, from this construct standpoint, but I would rather say ethical banking is more about transparency,
Okay.
right? Transparency in banking, right? So I should be, typically I as a consumer should know what are you doing, where is my money, what is being used for, etc. Right? And that my money is not being used for something else, right? So even the bank deploying the money is also into a very transparent activity in that sense, right? So then it becomes ethical in that sense. If I don't like your where you as a bank is deploying your funds
Mm.
into activities, I may be staying out. So I would rather say a transparent banking is ethical banking from that perspective.
Okay.
Right?
Now in a
I
lot
should
of
be transparent.
sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah,
Now
no
now
worries.
in a lot of conversations I get involved is, on one hand you have the consumers. They ask for good
Yep.
experiences. They want ethical, transparent experiences, and then you have the bank that says, "I want to make money." So do you see a contradiction in this, or how do you play this? Because in my experience, I think these times where you could just close a branch and you could justify the investment in a digital channel are gone. So a lot of the people I'm talking to, they struggle to justify investments because they need to generate revenues over their channels. And so do you think this uh, providing experiences, being ethical, can also translate into revenues?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. See, from the perspective, see, there have been banks which, which claim, or rather, I have not gone deep into their balance sheets or, the ways of working. Uh, Ethical banking happens to be a way of making money as well, right? See, you should, in my view, why will a consumer come to you, right? One is typically the loyalty part, right? It is not only the brand, but the relevance of that brand to the consumer that brings in the loyalty. Okay. Now, to bring that relevance, you need to work on experience and ethics, right? Ethical banking from that perspective. So once you have loyal customers, obviously the money or the making way of making money will arrive. Okay, at the end of the day.
I think
Now,
I think I agree with
yeah,
that because we also a recent study showed that loyal customers are 74% more likely to spend
yep,
more on products with a bank. Now the big question is, how do you make them loyal? What would you
yeah,
recommend banks to do to get a loyal customer?
that's what I said. Relevance, right? You have to be relevant to a customer or a consumer in his journeys, right? To make that customer a loyal customer. It's not only the brand, right? relevance of that brand to this customer's journey, user journey, or customer journey has to be there. That's where loyalty and experience led banking both tie together, right? So once you have an experience led banking or experience banking and making it relevant for that customer's needs and the life or the moments of truth, you have a loyal customer with you,
Mm. Uh, you know
right?
what what I see very often is, you know, looking at my life, of course, my demands changed over time. You know, when I
Yeah,
was young, never had money. Then
yeah,
first I needed to get cash somewhere, and then later I needed a mortgage. Then I had a bit of wealth, so my needs changed, and I guess so. For someone to be relevant in my life, he also needs then to offer me different things. And what I very often see is that new challengers, new banks have very cool experiences, but you know, to be relevant for a mortgage or to be relevant for an investment, you also need to have the trust piece in place. So,
yes.
so do you think this plays in favor of the legacy banks, or do you think the new challengers will be able to fix the trust piece over time?
Uh, New challengers fixing trust piece will take time. Okay, uh, that's where an opportunity for the large banks is, right? uh, to invest in those infrastructure or invest in that, the data, the technology, or even human led. So it's all I say is basically it's a technology and a human led activity which the big banks are quite adept at, right? And they should leverage this gap, right? So the consumers have not yet built that trust with the new age banks in typical products like mortgage, right? They still believe new age banks to be, a wallets or a money transfer from that perspective, right? But the primary bank account of that particular customer is with obviously the large banks or the mainstay banks, as I would say. Now that gap of that experience, if the banks, large banks, or the banks which have been there for long, have that data with them, and they have that gap to play with, and hence what would happen is loyalty, relevance plus trust. If you add the two together, you gain a loyal customer, right? So, for me, for example, I would have a bank account with one of these banks, and that has been running over years, right? While in between, I would have played around with multiple, let's say the new age banks, but till date, they have not been able to switch my primary account onto these new age
Mm,
banks for that
mm,
matter, right? Only because of the trust, right? The trust factor. And when I said, you are absolutely right when you said relevance is also the moments of truth. When I say moments of truth, that is changing with the life journey as well, right? So you are a student, you need some support during your student days, or you are getting married, you need, or buying a house for that matter, or a mortgage in that sense, right? So that life moment data is all available with the bank, large banks. For the digitally native banks to get onto that portion where somebody is sharing data with the digital native banks or the new age banks, it would take time, right? Across the markets. It's not only pocket specific or market specific, but I guess that gap can be. It's with the large banks to come in,
mm.
walk into that space which is there.
Which essentially, in essence, means that the competitive edge should still be with traditional banks if they get
Yeah,
transformation right, because building trust and getting access to data takes much more time than doing a
correct.
technical transformation, one could think. But on the other hand, these technical transformations also sometimes don't really make progress. Now let's assume I'm one of your clients. I buy into everything you explain to me. I want to become more relevant. I want to make better use of my data. So where do I start? How would I start this journey? What would you recommend me to do?
Over the years, I've been through this question across, with multiple of my customers or not even customers, industry folks whom I keep on speaking, right? With, see, first and foremost, absolutely clear vision, right? Absolutely clear vision. The leadership should be empowered, right? Many of these, while ambition, vision, and gap, execution, that gap, as I say, is always there. But an empowered leadership is a key, right? With a clear vision. Empowered leadership with the clear vision and an agile culture, right? So these three things are a key ingredients, as I would say, where they can, they have to start with these, right? And then it's not a quick fix solution, right? This kind of an exercise will take time to also mature. As the data grows, you need to understand that data, make sense out of it, etc. So there are a few things. You need to have the execution discipline, right? So you need to have that execution discipline of executing this program or stream or thread, whatever you call it, right? And clarity of purpose, obviously vision is there, right? So that's the clarity of purpose to build that real differentiator should be there, right? So we get sometimes lost in long transformation journeys somewhere, right? And that actually takes away the core vision or the clear vision, with the vision that we started with, right? When I say we, that means, the technology enablers like us, along with the banks, all put together. If you see, I see that as a challenge, if the large banks need to work on this, right? So there has to be empowered leadership, clear vision, and an agile culture.
Okay. Which one of these things you see very often missing, or maybe not being in optimal stage? Is it a lack of vision, lack of execution discipline? What is the main inhibitor, you think?
The main inhibitor, see, all these, there are few. I would rather not say. I would rather say main being, the leadership and the collaboration part. Right? It's a top-down commitment. As I say, it's a top-down commitment with a bottom-up energy.
Yeah, I like that.
Right?
Top-down commitment with bottom-up energy.
Correct. So that thing has to be there, and typically it has to be a cross-functional, right? It cannot be limited within the operations or customer engagement teams, or it could be the lending. It has to be an organizational kind of a flavor that has to be embedded into everybody in the organization, right? So that's what I say. Leadership and collaboration happens to be the key. Third, second point, which actually, since you asked for main, that is the main one. But the second one is budgets, right? Obviously, right? This is a long drawn exercise. Number one. Number two, requires the enough commitment in terms of monetary spends as well, or the budgets as well, to carry on this exercise, be it technological investments, be it people, right people, even the time that is spent on governing these projects or other, the strategic direction or the strategic thought that needs to be provided to this element. So that is also time and effort kind of a thing. So from that perspective, I see these are the key inhibitors, I would say.
Okay. So what I like and where I think we are aligned is that the human factor is still very important to get a
Yep.
transformation right. Now nowadays everyone thinks AI is the solution. You know, AI can fix my code. It can boil my chai in the morning. So AI can do anything. So do you think AI is really helpful, or do you think AI is just adding another layer of myth and complexity? How do you see that?
Uh, so essentially, even chai has an AI, CHAI.
Okay.
Right? Anyways, see, I see this as a human and tech synergy, right? It's the future is going to be hybrid. Okay, AI is not going to take over everything, right? It has to be technology enabled. More of use of technology we'll see, but it is always going to be human led. Okay, because uh, just to give you an example, it would be AI insight while the human empathy and the context. These two will get married,
Hmm. Hmm. So
right?
if I understand you
Yep,
correctly, AI can help you greatly to make sense of huge amounts of information, but someone needs to interpret it then still.
absolutely. Not only interpret, I would rather say bring in the empathy, right? It's a human to human empathy that AI will never be able to encroach upon, right? And that empathy and the context, see, even if you look at, still we are trying to figure out, we know that a decision is done. Let's assume in an experience led banking, and I'm starting out with that infrastructure. The data points that come into that system, technology wise, right, is always when a decision is done, right, by the customer. He would have walked or bought a TV or a television, or bought some trips to Switzerland, for example. The why part, why did he do that? That is missing.
Yeah, I think the
Okay.
why is important in banking, especially. You know,
Yeah.
for example, with our technology, we created this conversational style banking, and we're using agentic AI, so you can ask
Yeah.
uh, the agent, can I afford a trip to Japan? And then it does your cash flow calculation, all the things a bank does. But then it goes outside of the bank and it kind of can book you the flight, you know.
Yep.
And I guess
Yep.
this why is then difficult to explain to a regulator. You know, why has it
Yeah.
booked this flight? So do you think there will be still a lot of red tape and restrictions about the use of AI in banking?
Yes, in a regulated industry, it has to be there and it will be there, right? So if you look at the regulators as well, regulators are also are opening up sandboxes, the sovereign sandboxes across, right? So you will have one in Europe, here in India we have, right? So regulators are open in terms of experimenting in those sandboxes, right? Because banking as a regulated industry as of now, and in future, will have to be controlled from the purview of AI, and especially the agentic AI, right? Now, agentic AI, the point that you touched upon, why is the explainability part, which has to be there anyways, right? What I was referring to as the why is that, let's say, why did I buy that television, right? The television that I bought, for example, why did I buy that television? Nobody knows, right? That's something which is there. So essentially, that human empathy will still remain. But coming on to this point of the regulation, that is going to be further stricter, right? I mean, regulators are also learning along with us. I will tell you that way. Okay, every day we have a new evolution. Let's say, for example, Claude co-work came up last week, I guess, right? And all the stocks went southwards across the markets. Primarily, it's more of a, I would rather say it's more of a hype which is being reacted to. Regulators are still watching. Banks have been given the way they want to work with, or rather, clear guidelines are available, and regulators are evolving those guidelines as well. Right nowadays, I have customers or prospects asking me more about AI security than about the AI itself.
Yeah,
Right?
definitely. I mean, I have the same experience. You know that make sure data doesn't leave the environment
Yeah.
of the bank and the security and who can interfere and similar questions, I guess. By the way, I bought software stocks over the last few days because I think was a bit over dramatic correction. I think that the people overestimate what AI can do short
Correct.
term. You know, I
Yeah.
think there are very useful applications around testing, creating data
Correct.
dashboards and stuff, but I think there are also limitations to it. Can I use AI to create these better experiences?
Uh, we did one POC very recently where using AI, I would rather have an experience which is generated or rendered on runtime, right?
Can you explain
So
that?
there, so typically what we used was basically Gen UI, right? Or agentic UI for that matter. So, anyways, I have the data of the customer, etc., his geographical coordinates, what was the previous action he did, for example, right? And I will give you one quick example. Let's say, for example, in a mobile app, in a mobile banking app, you need to update your KYC, and within that, the let's say the mobile number, right? So you have a fixed set of menus through which you navigate and just place in that request for updating the number, right? What I say as Gen UI is the screens would be structured to the need and the context. You don't need to traverse through the entire menu. You just say, I need to update my mobile number. It should bring up a screen. It is different than the chat conversations. If you go to Claude or ChatGPT or any of these, you write, there is a verbose text appears. Verbose text is not for banking app perspective or banking. Consumers need very structured information. So that structuring of that information, placing the right components, whether it is a list of values, dates, blah, blah, etc., is completely decided by the AI engine. Okay? My mobile app just a renderer. So, give you two examples. Let's say you forget about the banking app. You need to book a flight, correct? So, one, either the agent can go ahead and book the flights, or it gives you choices, options. In a conversational UI, which I call, it gives you 1, 2, 3, 4 as the listing. In case of Gen UI, it should give me those callouts, generate it runtime, and I click. It's not the web page of, let's say, Kiwi or any other travel portal. It knows what is the information that I know, what I want to go into, and places those as UI components on yours, right? So that's what I call as a Gen UI. And that's where it will be very contextual.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting. It opens up a huge variety of applications. I think it also makes it more accessible for people of different age groups. Where my parents are in the mid 80s and
Yeah.
my mom is still kind of computer savvy, but she struggles with when she needs to fill out stuff because there's so much
Yep.
information that is not relevant, and then to find the right thing. And I guess this opens a huge amount of opportunities. I like that. I think with flights, I recently booked a flight and I realized depending on the VPN I use, the price difference is 200%. So I guess you need to bring the VPN into play as well.
That AI has to be trained on those VPNs as well.
Absolutely. But going back to our
Yep.
banking topic. So I have now a clear vision. I put strong leadership in place. I have the bottom up energy, as you called it, and so where do I start now? I wanna show quick successes. What is in your experience easier? Do I need to find a good balance with fixing the data and changing thing on the experience side, or shall I start on the experience first, or I know that the right answer will be depends on what your situation is, but what would be kind of a general recipe that you have seen working with clients?
Yeah, typically what I would say is I typically recommend or advise CIOs or the leaderships. This question comes in multiple shapes and forms. You know, the foundational investments have to be in place. Okay. When I say foundational investments, it has to be balanced across cloud and data, right? That is the first priority. Because cloud is taking it, it gives you the enormous kind of scale, and leave aside the other geopolitical things that are in place. But technology wise, cloud gives you the elements that you need from this transformation. And you have to identify the quick wins, because you need to show up. You are at the best somebody's money you have deployed, right? So you need to show quick wins. Identify those, like for example, a simple chatbot or a onboarding journey, right? Um, which is fully digitally native, suave, polished across the board. I think that identification of that particular MVP or the use case, one or two, has to be there along with these foundational investments. That is point one. Then, as I say, it has to be a portfolio approach, right? Portfolio of which has basically short term uh, with short term impact with a long term resilience, right? Perspective, right? So that portfolio impact has to be there, right? So that one alone. Then you need to, I mean, measure the ROI. Only investments will not do the job, right? You need to calibrate again, if I am on the right path, right? So that element has to come in as well. It's not only just quick win, but the clear vision is the first one, that it may be a long drawn program. Make your investments balanced in terms of cloud and data. Identify those quick wins and take a portfolio based approach in terms of short term impacts, long term resiliency, and measure those ROIs continuously and calibrate yourself and recalibrate rather.
Now, one of the fundamental investments you mentioned is cloud. In
Yeah.
my experience, cloud adoption rate in Asia Pacific and Middle East is much lower than in Europe or the
Yeah.
US. And
Correct.
is this because the data centers were not there, or is this something cultural that people want to be in control themselves, or where would you pin this down? What's the reason for that?
See, I would rather say it's more about one, the cloud data centers or the, most of the hyperscalers were not present. Okay. They did not enter early in the game there, right? So that is one reason, because once you enter, then you tend to bring that trust. It is also a trust, right? There also
Mm-hmm.
it's a trust factor at play, right? So trust factor, it takes time to build that trust. Uh, but I guess they're still catching up in that sense. What that has also resulted in, pockets of private players also, um, who offer these private clouds in many a sense. Second is the geographical condition. For example, Philippines, right? Geographically, it is, a set of islands. How do you set up the data center? Nobody knows. Nobody knows in the sense that you have Singapore and Hong Kong to support it, etc. That apart, uh, sovereignty will play a big part going forward. Okay. Sovereign clouds, for example, us, we are investing in sovereign clouds across, right? We have set it up one in India, and we are in talks or rather plans afoot in multiple other geographies as well. But primarily, data sovereignty, cloud sovereignty, uh, will be the key going forward, right? And once you have that established, that brings in the trust and then the adoption. If you look at it, I was reading one white paper of the Central Bank of UAE coming up with the sovereign cloud there, right? And probably we'll see banks transition out there. Right? It will also take time because uh, banks which have utilized, let's say, an AWS or a GCP or an Azure for that matter, the flexibility that it offers, etc. The sovereign clouds also need to be providing those kind of flexibilities in addition to the other technicalities. They have to be at par before that switch is made to the sovereign clouds.
Okay. Now the two of us over the last 45 minutes took a huge journey, starting from experience-led banking, what drives consumers, what drives
Yeah,
regulators, how do I set up my transformation program. We covered different
correct.
technologies that are helpful, maybe less
Yeah.
helpful. Is there anything I forgot to ask you and you would like to share with our audience?
Yeah, I mean, not as such, but I see the next 12 months, 12 to 18 months to be very, very exciting. Okay. Primarily in this experience led banking. Okay. Um, which is, almost similar to the deep banking part, right? You touched upon, to an extent, financial inclusion for that matter, right? I see financial inclusion will accelerate. The number of mobile phones, and that too, the feature phones for that matter, right? The number of phones are going up dramatically. And in emerging markets, financial inclusion, either for the unbanked or the banking challenged ones, would increase, right? I mean, that is going to accelerate. Second is across the globe, the last study that I read, probably I don't recollect whether it was a IMF or a private study, the rising affluent middle class, right? The middle class is actually, it's rising up in terms of, they need more, and they want to, the luxury for that matter, they are trying to reach up there, right? It's now they are demanding what is called as aspirational stuffs, and hence Their experience-led banking is what I call as a lifestyle banking. Their lifestyles are changing, right? So banking has to lead on to the lifestyles as well, right? And as I say, deep banking as yours will go mainstream.
I think that was a nice end to this podcast because it kind of tells very much what you said last, that it needs to go beyond banking. So it needs to involve lifestyle and experience. So thank you very much, Subrato, for sharing all your insights and your knowledge. It was super interesting. And I wish you all the best. And thank you very much for being on the podcast.
Thank you very much. Lovely talking to you. And thank you for having me here.